G'day folks, back again, and this time we'll be talking about water relations when it comes to keeping scorpions. Quite a detailed subject, and come on truck, hurry up, fast. Thank you. Quite a detailed subject, and there's a lot to say. I'll go into reasonable sort of detail to try and get you to understand why it's important to understand a bit about how water affects the chances of survival of your scorpion in captivity. Now, the most important thing to me, if you're going to keep something like scorpions, you need to go back to their environment, and you need to understand what's happening in their environment, look at the way they live, which I've spent countless nights camped in the outback looking at these animals and looking at the way they live. And it's that teaches you then what they need in captivity. Without that information, you're really sort of stabbing in the dark. So this particular video won't be anything. It's not going to be about how to keep certain species specifically. It's more to do with an overview of the water relations, monitoring and adjustment. So the question is, why is it important to monitor levels of hydration in scorpion housing? That's probably the key to it. Why is it important? Okay, so this is a picture of a sand dune out in one of the salt lakes in South Australia, a very arid area. And basically what I'm showing here, this is a dune, this is a salt lake edge, and we have rainfall if we're lucky. We have a little bit of rainfall. The rain soaks into the ground, and this particular soil here is the water transfers through it very, very easily. The particle size is quite large in this dune, and of course we have water evaporation. Okay, so water penetrates the soil and it disperses throughout the soil, and what we find is that if we go into the dune, like in depth, not to the edge of course here, but what I mean is down into the soil, we find that the deeper we go, the greater is the hydration. So there's more water further down. And that's pretty straightforward because the sun hits the top layer of soil, evaporating the water in the top layers. And so the water that's deeper is not, obviously it's not at the surface, so it's always going to have some level of water in the lower areas of soil. And what does happen too is that as the soil dries out in the top, it actually draws more water up, and that's because of the negative pressure. So you've got less, as it dries out, as the soil dries out, you've got less water pressure in the top layers, and that will then draw through a negative tension process water up. But if you dig down, even in the middle of summer, you're always going to get some level of hydration in the soil. And of course, if you are a terrestrial invertebrate and you live in contact with soil constantly, then it means that water becomes very, very important. Far more so, for instance, than a flying insect. Okay, the larval stage might have a closer association with water and hydration and the importance, but the flying insect, like a wasp or something, it needs water, but it's a very different kind of an association than an animal that's been its entire life living in contact with substrate. Okay, so can scorpions move to areas of different hydration in the housing you give them? And does the level of humidity have a gradient? So this picture here, I've written here, areas under the plants hold more water and are cooler. Scorpions burrow under the vegetation to reach higher regions of hydration. So naturally the vegetation, as we see here on the dune, shades the soil from the sun. And due to that, there's less evaporation of water under the vegetation than there is like in these open areas. So scorpions head to these areas. It's cooler, there's more water, they can burrow down. So it obviously aids in their survival. They're not going to dry out, because in these kinds of environments, this is obviously an arid environment. Water retention is really, really important. Being able to keep control of the amount of water that you have in your body. So the other important thing that I've written here is open sand is dry and it's well ventilated, active zone. Okay, so some scorpions will wander out onto this open area at night, forage for food, into these areas here, onto the salt lake. And this all forms part of their regulation, the fact that they can escape from the high humidity, from the higher levels of hydration that exist in their burrows or wherever they're existing. If it's down in leaf litter and debris at the base of these vegetative areas, they can escape from that and come out into the open. And that's important. So when you build your housing, you have to say to yourself, well, can my scorpions move to areas of different hydration? Is the humidity the same across the whole housing? That may or may not be a problem depending on the species. So the way to understand that is like this. First of all, understand the scorpion's adaptive physiology, which is what I've been talking about. Adaptive physiology is to do with water and temperature, are probably the two major parameters. So scorpions need to escape heat, they need to escape light, and they need to find a place where they can control their evaporative water loss, so the water loss from their body. Okay, so that's, you need to understand a little bit about that. So each species is going to be a little bit different. The way to find that out is to find out where they come from, where they live. And that's why it's important to know, if you are going to keep scorpions, where your species comes from. This is one of the downsides to buying scorpions from pet shops, because the pet shop owners just don't give this sort of information away. You're better off getting them from someone that knows what they're doing, that knows what they're talking about. Or you find the scorpion yourself, which is even better. So understand adaptive physiology, that's the first thing. Now, then you establish housing suited to controlling environmental parameters. So you need to be able to control the parameters. You need to be able to control the temperature. So obviously, you need to be able to move it into a cooler environment if it's getting too hot. You don't want to have it in the sun. You need to be able to move it to a place where it's out of the sun. You need to be able to add water to it. You need to be able to control ventilation. So if it does end up being, you've added a bit too much water to it, increase the ventilation to let that water out. If it's a time of the year where maybe you want to keep more water trapped, maybe the scorpion needs to shed its skin, maybe the scorpion has babies. In this case, you might want to reduce the ventilation. You might want to increase the humidity. So you need to be able to control environmental parameters. So monitoring the housing environment, it's pretty straightforward. Look at the colour of the soil. Damper soil is darker. Okay, damper soil is darker. Dry soil is lighter, for instance, so you can just visually look at it. And keep an eye on the temperature. You might even have something to measure humidity. That would be really good. That'd be a good thing. So try and monitor what's going on. Don't just ignore it. Now, monitor the scorpion's health using scales. Now, there are lots of ways to monitor a scorpion's health. You can look at it and visually see. The problem is that if you visually see a scorpion and you see it's got problems, it's going to be too late. Bringing a scorpion back from the point of, where it's obviously ill is just about impossible. It's just, I don't know how to do it. I don't know if anybody can successfully do it. You just don't want to allow it to get that far. So I've found that one of the best ways to monitor the hydration, which is probably one of the most critical parts of the scorpion's health, is to use scales. And I'll talk about that in a short while. And so we adjust the housing environment as needed. So we monitor, so we establish a housing that we can control the parameters in. We monitor the housing environment, we monitor the scorpion's health, and we adjust the housing environment as needed. And that all comes back to understanding the scorpion's adaptive physiology. If you see your scorpion doing this, this is called stilting. This is Urodacus armatus. This is a normal behavior. This is a form of thermoregulation, which means that as temperature goes up, when temperature goes up, the air expands. When air expands, it allows more room for water vapor. So you end up with a higher absolute humidity. Okay, so absolute humidity and relative humidity are two different things. When the absolute humidity becomes a little bit high on the high end, and this will happen when temperatures like in spring and summer, you start getting the spring and summer, and your housing has got a fair degree of hydration. You might see a scorpion doing this. It's coming out, and what it's doing is it's trying to remove heat from its body by holding itself up and allowing airflow across its body. It's normal as long as it's not doing it all day and all night. If it is, then you know, if the scorpion does it for a few hours and then goes back into its burrow or something, that's fine. But if you see it doing it a lot, you might be thinking to yourself, maybe the temperature's too high, which is the main thing, and then the humidity. So I would be looking at reducing the temperature and also slightly increasing the ventilation. So that's called stilting. Now what we have here is, this is what's known as a false bottom system. Okay, this is a 2-foot tank, I think. And a false bottom system is in the back. Up here we have a water pipe. So it's just a pipe, plastic pipe. It goes down to the base of the tank. In the base of the tank at the very bottom, I've got something, I can't remember how I set this one up. I might have used bottle tops or something, plastic bottle tops, to hold mesh, here it is like fly screen, off of the base of the actual tank. So you've got plastic caps or something that forms a foundation on the bottom. Then you've got fly wire on top of that. On top of the fly wire, you then add stones. You could add marbles, stones, whatever you wanted to add to it. And then on top of that, you put your substrate. Okay, now it can be, the substrate choice is not really super critical. I prefer to use substrate from the animal's environment, if possible. It's not a bad idea to mix sand with that cocoa coir peat material, cocoa husk that you can buy. Mix it up. The reason for that is that the cocoa husk is very good at retaining moisture. So what's happening here, this is really quite fascinating, because you add water to the pipe. The idea of the lids on the bottom is to allow the water to easily move across the base. Okay, and then also what will happen is, then you can use stones if you wanted to on the base. It doesn't have to be lids. Water will actually make its way up through evaporation, through capillary surface action, up through this wire, up into the stones, and the soil will draw the water up. And I've got these arrows drawn, so you can see the change in colour here of the soil. Here it's darker, and it's sort of like a line of dampness. It's the most damp down here, obviously, and it's drier up here. Now this is the same situation that I explained back here, okay, with the rainfall situation. The deeper you go, the greater the hydration. The closer you get to the surface, you've got lower hydration, drier soil. That's what happens in the environment. And you've got water loss by evaporation, and you've got rainfall. Now you're simulating the rainfall by adding water to the base of the false bottom, and the water loss through evaporation is going to occur naturally. And you want to have a ventilated lid in this situation, just a fly screen, a fair amount of area of fly screen lid to allow water to evaporate out. Otherwise it's not going to work as well. Now what's interesting here is that, have a look where these are Urodacus armatus. You can see where the scorpion has burrowed down to. It's burrowed down to a position just above the water level. And this is only a few days after I set this one up. So you can see how the scorpion has gone to a point where it's happy. It's chosen a spot that it likes. So if you produce a housing and you don't have this setup, where is your hydration going to be? Is it going to be here, 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 or is it going to be up here? Where is it going to be? That's the problem with a situation where you don't create a gradient. You're putting the scorpion into a situation where it has no choice. Here, the scorpion has choice, and the scorpion knows where it's going to do well and where it isn't. It's a natural thing. Now, as this dries out, because over time this water level will start, it'll get drier as you go down if you don't add more water, and that's fine. That's one of the good things about the system. It has a built-in safety mechanism. It's like an insurance. The depth of the soil is the insurance. The deeper the soil, the better. So as this dries, the scorpion will dig down lower. Now notice how this one is closer to the surface than this one. This one's further down because I'm adding water here, it's wetter here than it is down here. More water is being taken up in this area than it is down in this area. So this scorpion has dug down deeper to get to the right levels than this one has. This one, it's damper here, you can see it by the change in colour. So that's how important that is. This is what allows the scorpion to regulate its own internal body fluids. Okay, it's all about concentration of body fluids. The amount of water that's in the hemolymph is very, very important. If it's too low or too high, then you're going to suffer. I think that's all I want to say about that. So the important thing is depth. If you can produce a tank with a lot more depth, you're going to have a much better situation. The problem with these kind of setups is that you often don't see much of the scorpion. Like, for instance, you'll get them and they'll burrow into the middle somewhere, and you won't see the scorpion for 6 months. Now that means you've got a very happy scorpion. If you don't see your scorpion for 6 months, you have a very happy scorpion. If you see your scorpion out wandering around and it's like going up the glass and it's climbing around the glass, it's wandering out, that's bad. That means the scorpion is not happy. It's trying to get out. It's trying to, this environment is not suited to me, I want to leave. If you see a scorpion, you don't see a scorpion for 6 months, as I said, then you have a very happy scorpion, because scorpions spend most of their time doing nothing, especially scorpions like Urodacus. This is a similar system. Well, it's virtually the same. I've got stones on the bottom. I don't think I used any screen in this one. You don't have to use a screen. I've got a pipe, once again, leading to the bottom. You put water in here, and the water just diffuses through the rocks. The soil drags through negative tension, draws the water up towards the surface. This system here, what I've got here is, this is half sand and a half core peat, like cocoa peat, husk material, whatever you call it. And I've got little buthids. Here's one here. This is an undescribed species of Lycus from the Mount Lofty Ranges in South Australia. They're more of a winter active species, and they're very, very interesting. Buthids are far more interesting than, for instance, Urodacus, because they're just a lot more active. They just do a lot. They interact with each other more. You can put 20 or 30 of these little guys in here, and they'll interact with each other, and they'll get on, because even in the wild they get on. Oh, you probably get the odd one eat another one, because that happens in the wild as well. You don't want too many in a small area. But the key thing to this setup is, well, there are a number of things. As I said, the stones, and then the deep substrate. Very, very important. The layer of stones allow the water to spread out. The next most important critical aspect of this is the bark. The bark, lots of layered bark, layered. So get bark and you pile on top of each other. So when you're building this, you have your base set up first, then you get your bark and put it in on an angle. Put it in on an angle and start packing soil in and around it, bit more bark, bit more soil, bit more bark. And what you're doing is you're creating a means for the scorpion to get down into the subterranean environment. And so you're going to have all these layers of all these different layers of hydration. You're going to have higher levels of hydration at the bottom. You're going to have intermediate areas. You're going to have areas on top that are wetter and damp and are drier, and so there's a lot of range. And that means the scorpion can more readily find where it wants to be. If it's too humid here in this area here, for instance, too damp, because this is near the pipe, this is going to be the damper end, the scorpion's not happy here. I can't lose water. I've got too much water on board. Maybe mycosis might be a problem. The scorpion can then move down. It can live in another area down here. So it gets to regulate. It gets to move around and find where it's most comfortable. Very, very important. You can do this with any species of booth. It doesn't matter what you keep. You want to keep salt lake scorpions or any kind of, you want to keep Osmetroides or spider specialists. This is the way to do it. And you'll see them come out because buthids are active. They are far more active than scorpions like Urodacus, for instance. They're smaller, although some of them can be 50 or 60 millimeters long. I've seen Osmetroides 60 millimeters. They can be quite large. Just far more active. And if the other thing too, if just a bit of a hint, if you want your scorpions to be active, don't overfeed them. When you feed them very, very small food items. If you give a scorpion a large food item, the scorpions are extremely efficient at utilizing all the energy in a food item. So if you give a scorpion a large food item, it may not want to eat for quite some time. It's going to remain inactive. And as I said before, if it is active, really active, that's probably not a good sign. Coffee. If you have any questions about this, leave them below underneath the video and I'll see if I can answer them. So once again, this is what I mean. This is the same thing as the environment back here. Okay? Dry on top, wetter on the bottom. What you're doing is you are emulating the natural environment. One of the things that you can't control as easily in this situation, of course, is temperature. If we go back here, it's hot here during the day, and down here it's stable. And down on the ground, it's 20. You've only got to go down 30 centimeters, 300 millimeters, and it's 25 degrees Celsius. It's incredibly cool in a desert environment that far on the ground. It just goes from being 60 degrees on top to 25. That's another important factor that's much, much harder to control in this situation. I mean, if you wanted to get super technical about it, you'd build a really big thing. You'd have some kind of a cooling system on the bottom from a fridge or something. So you had some sort of a cooling thing, and then you would have electronic control, and you would keep the bottom cooler, and you would allow the top to heat up. You might even have heat lamps and things on top to stimulate heat during the day. You might have them turn off at night. There's a whole lot of things you can do to emulate the natural environment. So now, scorpion, weigh in. It's weigh-in time. Why do we weigh in, and how is weighing in useful? Now, what I've done is I've purchased these scales off of eBay. They're not expensive. They're little gem scales used for measuring, I suppose, small gems, maybe small amounts of gold or something. This one only goes up to 10 grams, but it's accurate to a thousandth of a gram, 0.001 grams. It says on here, Aussie Scorpion Forum Scorpion Weighing Competition. Years ago, I had a Scorpion Forum. Some of you might even remember it. And I had a competition where people would have to guess the weight of Arnie before I published it. And I would publish it by showing a photograph of Arnie the Urodacus armatus, being weighed. And it was a bit of a fun competition. It would go for 12 weeks at a time, and people would need to guess the weight. And I would tell them whether he'd eaten or not, and whether I had added water to the system or not. And there was a graph, so people could follow the line chart and see how Arnie's weight was changed. And the idea of the competition was really to teach people, help people to learn how important it is to weigh your scorpion. Because if the scorpion is gradually drying out, because scorpions lose water through their cuticle, which is their exoskeleton, through the mouth, through the anus, through their genital operculum, they lose water. Okay, so this is the hydration thing. This is all about the regulation. Now, you're not going to see this water loss until it's too late. You'll see the scorpion, it'll have its tail out flat, it'll just won't look well, it'll be sluggish, it might be sort of moving in jittery movements because its nervous system is not functioning properly. Too late. By measuring the weight of the scorpion on a regular basis, you will see whether or not it's remaining stable. So here's an example of a graph from one of these competitions that I had. This is the week number. So week 0 means at the very start, week 1 through to week 12. And on here is the weight in grams. So Arnie, the Urodacus armatus, this is his little tail here. He started at 0.959 grams. So he's a little bit less than 1 gram. And then he went up in weight, and he went down in weight, and he went down in weight. I haven't written on here where I added water. I would have added water definitely here. As you can see, and he might have eaten here. I can't remember now. I haven't got it written on this chart. But this point here, I know for a fact that I've added water. Now, this is the Tubioskepton. It's just a takeaway container. There's a dead cricket. Okay, dry end, hydrated end. Now, on the side of the container, you might see some holes. This is the end. Here's some holes. This is the ventilated end. So this end has greater ventilation than this end. This end, therefore, has a higher humidity than this end. So Arnie can regulate. He can go backwards and forwards. I'm adding the water here. There's a big piece of curved bark. The curved bark goes over the damp area and it goes down into the dry area, enabling Arnie to regulate. Okay, now, small containers that are ventilated, and that was one of the key points about this study and this competition that I had, is that small containers require a lot of maintenance, a lot of monitoring, because they lose their water very, very easily. It's only a very small environment. So it's not really a great way to keep them unless you are very, very vigilant. The good part about it is that you can easily catch the scorpion weigh it. You can easily see how the scorpion is going. So if you really want to be watching a scorpion and seeing what's happening, small containers are better. I actually prefer them in a lot of ways. And that's one of the main reasons, because I like to study ecdysis. I like to study what's going on with the young and that sort of thing. So I like to be able to see the scorpion. Deep systems are great, but if you want to breed them long-term, deep systems are probably going to be a really good idea. But if you want to learn about their biology, then probably smaller containers are a bit better, but they're harder to maintain. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, how is it that Arnie increased weight just by adding water to the container? Well, because Arnie doesn't drink water. Arnie doesn't drink. If you spray water in there and there's water droplets on the side of his container, he won't drink them because he doesn't drink free water. Neither does Urodacus yoshenkoi. And there are a number of these arid-adapted scorpions, which they may well have lost the ability to drink water. I mean, some scorpions, the higher rainfall scorpions drink water. Urodacus elongatus, Manicatus, Planomanus, they all drink water, but these guys don't. So what happens is that when this water here is, when the soil is hydrated, Arnie stands on it, and he actually absorbs the water into his body through his feet, through osmosis. So in other words, through some sort of negative body tension. So the hemolymph, or his blood, is low in water, which creates a negative tension, which means you can draw the water from the soil. And that's another whole involved story that I'm not going to go into here, but that's basically what's happening. And that's why he's increased weight, because he's actually drawn the water up through osmosis. The other way to do it would be to feed him, but I don't think he would take on enough water with one feed. The other thing that you don't want to do is have it go up and down too much. You want to try and keep this stable. So this was a pretty severe drop here. And it's probably a bit further than I would be happy with. If only gets down around here, in this area here, 0.4 to 0.6, he'll die. And that's what I mean by it doesn't take long, if you're not vigilant and you're not watching, for this graph to dip down into the dangerous area where the scorpion can then suffer and die as a result of water loss that you won't see. So good, he's back up, he's well hydrated, he's back up, he's above 1 gram, he's doing really well in this area. So things to remember. Okay, scorpions need to regulate for the best chances of survival. They need to be able to move from areas of higher hydration to areas of lower hydration. So a wetter environment to a drier environment. Both soil, water and humidity. So soil water, so how much water is in the soil is important, but also the humidity. As I said, with the stilting, if it's too humid, the temperature goes up, the absolute humidity goes up, the scorpion is the environment, the atmosphere is dumping heat onto the scorpion. Scorpions are ectotherms. That means they get their energy from the environment. Okay, you know yourself what it's like on a really humid day, on a hot, humid day. It's a lot hotter on a humid day of the same temperature than it is on a day that hasn't got that humidity, because water contains energy, and that energy is being dumped onto you. You cannot lose heat when you've got an atmosphere that's dumping heat onto you. So watch out for stilting. It's normal as long as it's not happening day in, day out, and it really should be seasonal stilting, mainly during the summer months. Not all scorpions will drink free water. Some rely on osmotic uptake and the water from their prey, as Urodacus yashinkoi, Urodacus armatus, and other inland desert-adapted Urodacus. I'm not sure if it occurs with any of the buthids. I don't think I've done any studies on water uptake on those. Small containers with ventilation require the greatest monitoring. Small container, small volume of water, water easily lost. Okay, small containers are very risky that are ventilated. If they're sealed, it's a different situation. So small containers with little to no ventilation are well suited to some species, such as rockdwill and Urodacus. But the water levels must be right, not too high and not too low. So I've kept Urodacus right through their development, from their second instars right through to adult stage, in a container like about this big that's sealed. It has a mixture of sand and peat mixed in, and a little bit of water added into it every now and then. So it's almost dry, but because it's a closed environment, the scorpion's happy. Now people might think, oh, that's not very good, keeping a scorpion all its life in a small container. But the fact is that scorpions, especially Urodacus, like being in tight, small environments. They don't come out and wander around all over the place. They live in a very, very small area at the base of their burrow, called the living chamber. The only reason they come up to the top is to catch food. And catching food is risky. It's potentially dangerous. Scorpions, all animals, really don't spend time doing something which is potentially dangerous. It doesn't make sense from an evolutionary point of view. Okay, so it would be selected against. What's selected for is a behavior that keeps them alive and allows them to reproduce. And in this case, it's being at the bottom of the burrow in that safe environment at the very bottom, which is only that long and that high. This container is actually by volume larger than where they normally live. Deep soil. False bottom systems are the best, but observation of the scorpion will be minimal. Okay, unless it's buthids. I think buthids are fantastic. If you keep them, you can keep a number of them because they tend to get along reasonably well. As long as you've got a lot of spaces for them to get away from each other in, they'll get out. They'll come out and they'll interact, and they might smack each other with their tails. You'll see all sorts of behavioural things going on that otherwise you wouldn't see. Buthids are really interesting. You can have branches going up, they climb up and down, and rocks, and you can make it a really neat environment, and they'll always come out and they'll always be active. Urodactylscorpions, it's just that's not the case. If your Urodactylus is out wandering around all the time, it means it's probably dying. It's not healthy. All right. So once again, this is my book that I wrote 10 years ago or something. It's a lot of detailed information here that goes into the sort of things that I'm talking about in this video. If you really want to know more, I advise you to buy it, borrow it. You can borrow it on Amazon. There are libraries where it's available because it has the detail in it. And I'll leave the link in the video description for it. So if you have any questions, leave them below, and I'll try to answer them. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you hate it, give it a thumbs down. I need to know what you think. And I hope I've covered, at least covered generally, something about water relations and how it relates to you keeping scorpions. All right, cheers. Thanks very much, and see you next time.